All right, Alexander, let's discuss NATO expansion, this time with regards to Finland and Sweden. And they were actually having a conference, a security conference, Finland and Sweden. The other day, they were discussing regional security. Finland's Prime Minister Sanna Marin and her Swedish counterpart Magdalena Andersson were discussing the NATO bids in bilateral talks in Stockholm. And what I got out of it is this, that Finland is very close to making their petition, their bid to enter NATO. And Sweden is going to kind of sit back and see how it goes with Finland before they make a definitive announcement with regards to NATO. The other thing that I got out of it is that, according to Finland, the statements that Sanna Marin made, is that they're not going to take this to a referendum. And I quote, this is what she said with regards to NATO membership. All parliamentary groups and also the president will have the opportunity to make the decision in the coming weeks. I didn't hear anything about the people of Finland who will have the opportunity to make the decision in the coming weeks. I heard, I'm reading, parliamentary groups, the president will have the opportunity to make the decision. It seems like they're bypassing a referendum as well. So, and Stoltenberg also seemed very confident that Finland's going to make their bid to enter NATO. How do you see things?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that they are going to bypass the referendum because, in spite of what opinion polls seem to show, I think they're far from sure that if there was a referendum, it would go the correct way. So I think they're going to bypass the referendum. They're going to try and rush through a decision for Finland to join NATO in June, and I think Sweden will soon follow. I think this is now the agenda. This is being pushed incredibly hard by the Brussels bureaucracy, by the NATO bureaucracy. I mean, it was interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I mean, if you actually look where the debate all started, it actually started in Brussels. It didn't start in Stockholm or Helsinki. It was Brussels, the NATO people in Brussels who first started talking about this. And you can imagine, the amount of urging and talking and proposing and arms twisting that's been going on since then. And I'm going to say straightforwardly what I think this is. I think that, they sense deep down that they've lost Ukraine. Ukraine's never going to join NATO. So now they want their consolation prize. They want to keep NATO expanding because, well, that's what NATO does now. It's got to go on expanding. So, of course, they can't bring in Ukraine. So, they're going to look instead to the Scandinavia, countries that have historically always been neutral. Though I should say, certainly in the case of Sweden, this has been largely a fiction. Sweden has always been, to all intents and purposes, since the start of the Cold War, a NATO ally. I mean, not a member of NATO, but essentially on the NATO side of things. But anyway, that's what they want to do. Now, from a Russian point of view, Russians are not going to be happy about this at all, but it has been explained to me that from a Russian side, this actually simplifies their defense positions and forward planning in the Arctic, because it means that they can reach various parts of NATO territory that they would want to without having to find ways of circumventing these neutral states, which were Finland and Sweden. And since the balance of naval and military and air power in this part of the world has been shifting steadily towards the Russian side, I'm not saying that they welcome this, and I want to make that very clear, but from their point of view, this is actually going to simplify their military planning and decision making. So it makes no military sense to do this. It doesn't add anything significant to NATO's capabilities. The idea that it shifts the balance of military power in the Baltic is, as I understand it, simply wrong. NATO, in terms of naval power, is already dominant in the Baltic. But that capability is eroding as the Russians gradually build up their forces in St. Petersburg and in Kaliningrad. But obviously, it makes huge political capital for NATO, and of course, it's a way of keeping the NATO bandwagon on the road, saying that its expansion is still happening. And as I said, it gives people like Stoltenberg and the bureaucrats in NATO a sense that, this thing is still advancing, it's still expanding, even if they've lost the big prize, which is Ukraine.
Okay, so what do the people of Finland and or Sweden gain from this or lose from this?
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they completely lose because, after all, Sweden. Let's look at the history of these two countries. Finland allied itself with Germany against the Soviet Union in 1941. It lost a lot of territory. It was badly defeated. It was only because the Finnish leadership had the wisdom to pull out of the war at the end and do a deal with the Russians that Finland survived at all, and it wasn't absorbed into the Soviet bloc, as it could very easily have been. And so that was Finland suffered. Sweden remained neutral and emerged from the war, the Second World War, a very rich country. And neutrality during the Cold War worked well for both. What do they gain by aligning themselves, by joining NATO? Do they gain security? Well, only if you think that they're threatened. But why would the Russians threaten Finland or Sweden if they remain neutral? On the contrary, as I said, having Finland and NATO, which, to be very clear, in Sweden's case, having Finland and Sweden in NATO, and being very clear about it, Sweden, as I said, has always been, to all intents and purposes, a NATO ally, actually simplifies Russian military strategies in this part of the world. And of course, it makes the people of Finland and Sweden potential targets in a hot war. I'm going to add something else. The first Cold War, the Cold War that happened between 1948, when it really got started, and 1991, was a Cold War fought in Central Europe. There was the big Soviet armies were in Germany, and Germany was divided, and that was the source of tension. Very far, by the way, from Russian supply lines. And I've since learned from Russian people that, in fact, the Russians would have had logistical problems pushing west. Anyway, this Cold War, this new Cold War, if it ever becomes hot, is much more likely to be fought out in the Arctic, in Scandinavia and those sort of places, much closer to Russian supply lines, and in a way much more threatening, both to the United States itself, which, remember, is an Arctic power, and also in terms of dominance of the North Atlantic. So Finland and Sweden are putting themselves right in the front line of what could become a major struggle in Europe. Well, it's the choice of their leaders. Doesn't look as if the people of either of these countries are going to be consulted. Perhaps the only thing that can prevent it happening is Le Pen winning the election in France.
Why would that prevent it?
Well, she could block it. She could block it, and I suspect she might do. I'm not saying she will, but she might do.
If she wins.
Which is an enormous if, and not one I expect. I still think Macron is going to win in the end, because I think that they're going to pull they're going to pull all the plugs to make sure that he does win. So I think the decision. This is what I'm trying to say. I think the decision for Finland and Sweden to join NATO has, in effect, already been made. If Le Pen is elected president of France on the 24th of April, she may block it, which she legally could do. But bear in mind, you can have a country outside NATO, which is essentially integrated into NATO. So, I would strongly expect that one way or the other, the days of Finnish and Swedish neutrality are ended, and ended forever.
Yeah, and I imagine this is good for the EU kleptocrats as well.
Oh,
that they
absolutely.
would want Finland, Sweden. They want it all integrated. They want NATO and the EU pretty much integrated, perfectly integrated, I think is what they would like.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what they would like to see. And of course, some of them want to go a whole step further. They want countries like Finland and Sweden in NATO, and then they want to convert the European side of NATO into a military structure subordinate to the European Commission in Brussels. So, remember these two bureaucracies, NATO and the EU, both exist in Brussels. Once upon a time, they were separate from each other. With every year that passes, they become ever more integrated. And the eventual plan, I'm sure, is to integrate the two completely, but with the political structure essentially assuming control. I'm not saying it's ever going to happen, by the way. The US might not like it, and Britain certainly won't. But I'm absolutely sure that there are some people in Brussels who want it. And of course, Macron makes no secret of it. That's exactly what he wants.
Well, I think if you go back to the origins of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, you can kind of understand why the U.S. and the U.K. want to weaken Germany and France, but why they want a weak Europe as well. So I think they would be all for having NATO completely integrated with the EU, and I don't think they'll have a problem with having one layer of control resting and residing with the van der Leyens and the Michels, as long as they know that they're a layer above them. And I think that explains a lot why a weak Germany and a weak France and a weak EU benefits, let's say, the Anglosphere of the equation of the collective West.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the British and the Americans want Finland and Sweden in NATO for one reason. The EU wants it in for another reason. The EU fantasize about their European defence system, which will include Finland and Sweden. Remember, Borrell was talking about the EU sending arms to Ukraine. The EU, which is supposed to be a non-military economic political bloc. But anyway, you can see that's what Borrell wants. I think ultimately, with the Anglosphere, who get their way, not people like Ursula von der Leyen and Borrell, I think they will find at the end of the day that they will always be subordinate to the Anglosphere, to Washington and the NATO structures. But I am sure that agenda exists. In Macron's case, he's absolutely straightforward about it, and we can see that Borrell shares that wish also. I don't personally think it's ever going to happen, but you can see why each of these two factions wants Finland and Sweden within NATO, because in both cases, though in different ways, it advances their agenda, even though their respective agendas are in rivalry with each other.
Yeah, and Finland can be in NATO as quickly as, gosh, June to August. I mean, they're really fast tracking it.
Well, that's what they're saying exactly. Yeah. Which, by the way, tells you a lot about how integrated Finland and Sweden are within NATO already. For me, by the way, I may as well say that the fiction of Finland as a really neutral country died during the Yugoslav war, when the Finnish president or foreign minister, maybe he was foreign minister at the time, Martti Ahtisaari, went to Belgrade and negotiated with Milosevic, the Serb president. And it was absolutely clear that he was doing so on NATO's behalf.
Yeah. All right. We're going to find out soon enough if they're in NATO, that's for sure. They are really rubber stamping this. All right, the Duran.locals.com, everybody. If you're watching this from Rumble, you will see a button up top, a maroon red button. Click on that button. It'll take you directly to our Locals community. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code GOODDAY. Get 10% off all merchandise when you use that code at the Duran shop. It is Good Day. There is the mug.